Another thing that DARIAH likes to do is to experiment and innovate. We also want to be inclusive, and Thomas's keynote speech was brilliant, but we wanted to make the last keynote speech of more voices. So we wanted to invite, so this is the first time, this is very experimental, and we want it to be an informal lounge dialogue session. And it's great to see so many people haven't run off to the airport or to the train station already. So just to warn you, I would really like every single person in this room to think that they can contribute to this dialogue that's coming up now. So what we're going to have now is called the DARIAH Data Spaces Dialogue, imagining experimental data spaces for the analysis of cultural heritage using digital methods. So I'd first like to invite my panelists to my lounge, where we're going to have a more informal and dialogue with DARIAH. So please welcome to the floor. So I really mean it. So just really start thinking about how you would like to contribute to this dialogue. And I will come into the audience if we have too much silence. I may be a librarian, but I'm not into silence. So I will introduce my panelists, but it's great that we've got so many people around the DARIAH table. So just a couple of words of introduction. So Alba, in her last presentation, introduced us to the data space for cultural heritage with issues such as data quality, capacity building and reuse, and digital services for the public. She also mentioned that this is one of around 14 different data spaces. So here you can see cultural heritage in the middle, and you can see the sort of ecosystem of other data spaces in addition to cultural heritage. We could pick out many of these that could be of interest to the DARIAH community and to the Europeana community, but for example, language. Tourism, often cultural heritage is used in a tourism context, and then this data space here, known as the Open Science Cloud. Does that sound a little bit familiar? So we talked a lot yesterday and over the few days about the European Open Science Cloud, or EOSC. We also talked about the science clusters, and DARIAH being one of 63 different research infrastructures in this space at the moment, and with our science cluster friends, astronomy and particle physics, life sciences, environmental sciences, as well as the social sciences and humanities. So in the current project EOSC Future, we're working on this. So if we, in this paper said, we're maybe one of the data spaces, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a data space for research? Aren't the research aspects to all of these data spaces? Is the EOSC a data space already, or were we thinking of something else? So there is a lot of ambiguity, going back to our last speaker, excellent. But what could it mean to be a data space for research? And in the last session, our member of the public said, what about this collaborative cloud for cultural heritage? So how many people have heard of ECCCCCCH? So probably about 23.5%. So this is a new player, and over the past couple of years, there has been an expert group, and some members, I see Ira over here, Adeline had to leave, but there's some members of the wider DARIAH community that have been part of this expert group. There was also the stakeholder survey related to what a collaborative cloud for cultural heritage could look like. Earlier this year, a number of calls were released and the deadlines are happening in September. So at the moment, we've got no idea what the ECCH is, but we definitely feel as DARIAH that this is an extremely important initiative and something that we should start trying to imagine it. However, this is not easy. So this is sort of just the context of the discussion in this beautiful salon that we're just about to have. So if you've got the data spaces, the data space for cultural heritage and all the interrelated data spaces, including for research, is this the EOSC or is this different? How does this interrelate? And then if you bring in the collaborative cloud for cultural heritage, have we got redundancy here? Are we duplicating efforts? How, as a country, has to fund all of these activities in the liaison with the European Commission? How is all that going to work? So I guess we want to move towards trying to define which direction we may want to go, which is exactly the idea that we wanted, this context that we wanted in this keynote panel. So now I want to come over to my little salon here and introduce my friends that are around the table. So this is going to be really informal, so it's a first name basis, but then everybody's got an opportunity to say who they are and why are they here. So I'd like to pass the floor to Arba first.
Thank you, Sally, for this introduction. I'm responsible at Europeana for a particular area that is called the European Research. And under this umbrella, we nurture partnerships and collaborations with research infrastructures for so universities and research institutes. And we are also responsible for the engagement with academic and research communities across the new European environment, but also in the data space for cultural heritage.
Hello, my name is Steven Kleijsens. Sorry, first name, Steven. I'm a curator, trained as a book historian and philologist. I work at the National Library of the Netherlands and also happen to be the chair of the European Research Community, which is part of the ENA, European Network Association. So I think I'm here mostly to represent a large part of the community, being researchers and people working with GLAM. That's quite a task, but on the other hand, maybe I can imagine that most people in this community are mostly confused about what the data space and all this ecosystem is, and since I am one of those persons that is really confused about all of this, I think I can represent that community.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Marta and I work at the Institute of Literary Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences. This really long name there, in short, IBOPAN, who is a core group of the OPRES infrastructure, which is an infrastructure for open scholarly communication in social sciences and humanities. And within OPRES, IBOPAN is responsible for building this innovation lab, which will be a space for researching, discussing innovation in Skolkom, but also prototyping. And we're also creating a national note for Poland, which is quite a task, and trying to translate the European level things for Polish audiences, different ones, has been quite interesting. So I hope to bring this into the discussion.
Okay, I'm Tomasz. I'm Tomasz from Poznań Supercomputing and Networking Center. We have a longer name because we are affiliated to the Institute of Bioorganic Chemistry of the Polish Academy of Sciences. So PSLC is infrastructure provider or R&D center. At PSRC, we have different departments that deal with different domains, and I'm managing department which is focused on cultural heritage and digital humanities. It's called the Department of Digital Libraries Knowledge Bases. Still, in this department, we focus on technologies, you could say like infrastructure also, for cultural heritage institutions, for data aggregation. Like, for instance, we manage and develop European accredited national aggregator in Poland. And also for specific tools, we also do some specific tools for humanities scholars. We also collaborate with different initiatives. We are involved in, of course, DARIAH-EU. We are leading now the DARIAH infrastructure development project. We are also involved in DARIAH-EU. I'm part of the JRC body in DARIAH. But we also try to connect with other initiatives like Impact Center of Competence, which deals with digitization workflows, also with Open Preservation Foundation, DataSite, right, with persistent identifiers, and Time Machine, to have a different angle or different perspective on the cultural heritage and also digital humanities. So yeah, that's more or less my introduction. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Wow, I've got some cool friends in my little salon here. So we did want to structure this conversation a bit. I mean, organized chaos, we like to put it. So we've got a number of themes here. Oh, it's the old slides, but never mind. This is a bit of organized chaos. So we wanted to start with the users or community. So we've got these 5 themes, but maybe there could be others. Again, I haven't forgotten about this interaction with the community. So theme 1, who are we doing this for? The users, the community. Theme 2, data. What kinds of data, what kinds of data sets do our communities expect in this complex ecosystem? Technologies, what kind of technologies are the heart? Are there a range of technologies? How do they interoperate? Interoperability, what are the key interoperability challenges? Is this at the data level or interoperating between these different research infrastructures and other infrastructures in this data spaces ecosystem? And then finally, what is the role of research infrastructures such as operas, such as DARIAH, such as Clarin, and more broadly in this topic? So what is our responsibility as research infrastructure participants or communities in this space? So I am going to try to interact as much as possible with the audience. So 5 key themes here. Is there anything that you feel is missing from these 5 key themes at the moment? Is there anything that we should add already to this conversation? Yes, please. Yes. This is so we've got some interaction, dynamism, and movement, please.
Yes, thank you. The one issue I see that's not their theme is institutions.
Great. Thank you. So already institutions. Any other themes? Yes, please. Yeah, I told you it's going to be a dynamic session.
Just to let you think that, okay, I'm thinking to ontology and meta-ontology that you will need. Rather, what I would like to say is that in the biospace, in the biodata space, we have faced similar problems than yours, probably 15 years ago. Because when the genomics start, and it has been just an explosion of data, and people have started to understand where's the connection with gene or with this or with that, and they have to organize this. So there was something like 20 years ago, 100 of experience in order to face what you are facing. And today, only 6 or 7 or 10 perhaps remains, but they are well organized. It probably would be nice for you to look at what has happened in the biodata space.
Wonderful. So this is ontology, semantics, and interdisciplinarity. Some people from the biospace have already gone through this, so it's great we can already learn from colleagues. Right, let's go back. So we're starting with users. And I don't like the term users, but as a research infrastructure we have users, so let's think of maybe as communities. So I'm going to ask my friend Marta here. So who do you see as a potential key user community? Let's combine these two words. Who do you see as the key user community for this data space ecosystem? And how might we engage them in this conversation?
Thank you so much. It's a little bit funny because we discussed this during the break, and I said to Sally, ask me about the users. We research the users all the time in operas. And then I sat down and I thought, okay, now I have to say something about the users, which obviously, yeah. But then I started digging in deep what we've done in the past, let's say the group of researchers. There is no such community as researchers, I would claim, because it's such a heterogeneous group. And even if we dig in deeper to social sciences and humanities, we've done some great research. I'm a little bit worried it will soon be outdated on innovation in scholarly communication in 2021. And what we found were some general trends, but still the needs are so different because, as Thomas mentioned in Elizabeth's work, everything is so domain-specific, discipline-specific. So I think it's not an answer that I'm giving, but it's a challenge that needs to be borne in mind all the time, because even today when we were chatting, I forgot about it. I thought it would be an easy answer. I would just give some examples. No, I think it's something we need to be returning to this, and especially in something like data spaces, something that is so dynamic that it might be changing from a year to year. What people need, what digital methods they use. There are sometimes some trends, new tools. So yeah.
This is great to start discussing this. So there's a lot of diversity, maybe in terms of literacy as well, and all the different needs, what kind of methods do people use. So this is a very diverse communities that we'll be working with. So Alba, I think, Europeana, you've been sort of thinking about this topic as well.
Yes, users, communities. We have also other words in our vocabulary. It's pretty difficult to use. Users. The words audience, but gives a very passive idea of the people who can interact with us and with the data. It's difficult, but now is the moment for a mind shift, to engage all the professional students that are out there with the data, and to make them understand that if they feel part of a community, and they don't feel only users in their own traditional sector, they can really make the difference in what we call product development, help us improve our effort, the services that we provide. Okay, so when we think of digital cultural heritage, as I said in Willie this morning, it's natural to think of people in humanities and social science. But for us, when we talk to stakeholders, policy makers, decision makers who are not in academia, it's also our duty to let them understand what the needs are. In Europeana, we had such thing. We had such thing for a very long time. I'm responsible for an initiative that is called Europeana Research. But we had to work around that. It's not only research, that are teaching-related issues and needs that we have to meet. And of course, we hope to meet them thanks to support of DARIAH, other infrastructures such as our friends from Clarin and possible new ones.
Great. So within Europeana, you've been thinking about user communities and also how does the research interact? And has already been working with DARIAH and Clarin in the Europeana context. So I'm back again. So any thoughts from the audience, the community, about users that you would like to share at the moment? Yes, please, Aggregating. Thanks, Sally. Thank you. Well, I have a question that's kind of, I don't know, perhaps a bit provocative, but are we users, are we meant to be concerned about those things? Do they really concern us the way EOSC is built, the way ECCCH is going to be built, or are we really, really concerned in our everyday research work about data spaces or not? That's the question. Thanks very much. This is often, people don't know just the infrastructure until it stops working. They just want to do their day-to-day activities and their research. So does anybody have any thoughts on this?
Answering the question, I think we should be concerned, because data spaces, is about data, and data is the most valuable asset that you can have. You probably know as researchers that the data is at the core of every activity that you do. So I think we should be very much concerned about it, in the sense that we need to understand how we will, with the data space, how we will satisfy those users, because I'm not afraid to be honest of the term users, not sure where we are, but still, from my perspective, we have to make those users happy, right? That's the main goal, I think, in the context of the data space. So, as Marta and also Alba mentioned, we should put a lot of effort to investigate the needs. That's the core of the activity in the context of data space, in my opinion. For instance, like from my personal perspective, I would really like to see, for instance, cities, small cities or towns or villages using the data space, like cultural heritage data space, to build sustainable communities in the region, like attract people to use the cultural spaces or build the intangible cultural heritage for future generation. So yeah, that would also my view from the point of view that building a data space or serving other kind of domains or other usages.
Great, and already slipped into the theme of data. Thank you very much. Public, everybody. I think Andrea's next, and then over there. Yes, please. This is the exercise part of this as well.
I love that, Sally. Thank you very much. Well, you put it up provocatively as a dichotomy, users or communities, and I think we all know that you cannot really fight against the label of users. It's such an ingrained in all of the discourse kind of label. But I think we would all agree that we know that it is more nuanced. Yeah? And I think we should remember ourselves that there are more nuances to users. And it's not they and us, so it's all of us together. So what I think your study has found, what many studies have found, what also studies in our own archive has found, is that it is very hard to say who is the user group and who is the depositor group and who is the downloader group. And then you have the archives, the archivists themselves. They are by no means neutral in that whole game. So you have the same persons executing different roles depending on the processes they are involved in. And sometimes they are producers and sometimes they are consumers. And So what I'm really concerned about is what Thomas also said at the beginning, is that there is a discourse on the data spaces as if data is something in Earth and oil. Yeah, so that was the big analogy done 20 years ago. You can just take it out. Now we know that even in nature it isn't that easy. So if we take out gas and cloning, we're having a problem in the Netherlands. Yeah, but the data is not out there. They belong to somebody. They are produced by somebody, and I think DARIAH should kind of give a voice to the empowerment of those who either have produced or originated or worked with those data, so that you kind of bridge between the two. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Andrea. And that goes back to Vicky's presentation as well. So we talk a lot about the FAIR principles, but the CARE principles, data sovereignty. Who is the origins of the data? Please, thank you.
Hello, I'm Joan from the Digital Repository of Ireland. My question, it's about the users, and all of this is about accessibility. And we want people to access the data, however we describe that data. What I'm really curious about is how these three entities are interacting with one another, how they're coordinating with one another, and how they're going to prevent obstacles for researchers and users by filtering people in one way or another. I feel it should be transparent to the researcher. They shouldn't really necessarily know, am I going to the cloud for this, am I going to ECCH for that? So is there a level of coordination, and is that a role that DARIAH could play in terms of keeping things aligned?
Wow, that's really hit to the really heart of the issue here. And I especially like the last bit. Could DARIAH play a role in trying to coordinate these activities? I think I'll hand over to Thomas, because I'm sure he's got some thoughts on this, on maybe starting at the level of technology.
Okay. Oh, so it's no, I mean, it's a challenge, definitely, and it won't be easy, especially that those initiatives are kind of developed in parallel, and I presume there is no coordination body over there. So, but anyway, when it comes to kind of interoperability or exchange of information, is very difficult. My thought or my idea always is to really focus on your own domain, like work with your, for instance, data or with your tools, right? And make sure they are useful for the community you are involved in. And then once the data are available or required by other community, then you start to talk. In the context of technical interoperability, you always say about interfaces, APIs and so on. And here we also need a kind of an interface, because of course for one community, one community does not need to know very much details about the other's datasets, but they all need some general information to be included into their consideration and their context. So I also think that, this is the way of approaching this challenge.
Brilliant, thanks. And now I want to turn the floor to Steven, because when we were preparing this, Steven says, well, I've got multiple hats on. I'm a curator of digital collections at KB. I'm a book historian as a researcher, and I'm also part of the community. So from one single person, we've got different communities together. And how have you got any thoughts on this, as how can we make it easier for our users to navigate this complex data space? You said you were confused at the minute. Maybe you can say some words about that.
Yes, thank you. I think a couple of things have already been said in a way. The idea of having more interfaces between humans and machines and data, but also between data and humans. So in the end, I believe it all comes down to something like generosity. Maybe we need generous data, so data with generous documentation and provenance and information. And we need people who are willing to share their knowledge and their expertise and their skills. And so, for instance, the paper you and Gustavo, etc., have been writing about how to really have a workflow for collections of data for smaller institutions, things like that. So we've got a lot of wonderful frameworks already there. So the collections as data framework, the fair data framework, care principles, etc., etc. Or maybe we should have some kind of overarching framework of generosity to the network.
Generosity always sounds good, as well does kindness. No, thank you very much for this. Maybe I can turn to Marta now. So you're a lot to do with both open science advocacy, and I know you've done a lot of work in IPAN related to interdisciplinarity between communities. How does this, so thinking from a open science perspective, how can you see some of these open science values and principles, such as generosity, coming into these discussions?
Oh, loaded question again. So I think I can bring a couple of points together from what we discussed. At IPOPAN, we are often the people who are writing the newsletter, to researchers, humanities researchers, and we want to let them know what's happening in OPS, what's happening in DARIAH. And the topic I would like to bring into this is the topic of language. And so I agree that we as users should have the understanding of what is going on, but it doesn't need to be this very complex language of European infrastructures that sometimes we have at international conferences or at policy discussions, right? Because we notice that if we write like that, we lose some of our audiences, readers, to use this passive word, but when you write a newsletter and you want to engage someone, so we try to give very concrete case examples. So what does it mean, like open scholarly communication for social sciences and humanities? That's already very long, right? So, but if you give an instance that, for example, look, you were trying to do a digital edition and you've encountered those issues on the technological level. You couldn't share, you couldn't access the data that your colleagues have created for a number of reasons. There are issues with evaluation, so you need to print a copy of your book anyway. Then we start getting some engagement, and then the people also join the discussion because everyone has stories like this. From my perspective, that's the way to communicate with the end users who are not in this room, so with the researchers who are not on every day thinking about the infrastructures or thinking about the data spaces.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I always, in user research, reaching the audiences that we're not reaching is always, for me, the most interesting topic. So I'd like to turn over to Alba now. I mean, in Europeana, you've done a lot of research related to the communities and this kind of idea. And one of the things we've been talking about is, and it's something you just mentioned, Marta, about examples. So there's been a lot of our fantastic speaker just now talked all about ambiguity. But there is a lot of vagueness so back in the day, everyone said, so what does actually DARIAH do? It was always meant to be this vague kind of infrastructure. And if we can turn that to examples, maybe use cases or other ways that we can start making these ecosystem of data spaces real to people, to make them part of their everyday lives. So maybe, Alba, you've got some ideas related to how can we really take this to the user in a practical use case kind of way with real life examples.
Thank you, Sally. And this is a really difficult part of the whole data space thing. Of course, we need use cases, but we also need input from those who are developing, really use cases. In fact, now we are running a series of interviews in different parts of Europe because we want to hear from possible users, reusers, communities that are out there. We launched this consultation call for input about datasets. What does a dataset mean to you? And we are trying to involve them in a kind of storytelling thing because we want to hear what happens in their domains too. We hear also about domain-specific needs. And we have to move from that. I'd also like to address Hayati questions. Do users need to know what research infrastructures are, digital infrastructures are? Maybe they do if they are some ambitious to work at the international level, but I'm also very excited about the idea of hubs and how it could work. They have to know about, I would like them to know about interfaces instead that they have platforms that we want to make available for them. And there it's a direct link to possible, communities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for this. So now I'd like to come back. I think one of the colleagues mentioned institutions. So there are many people in this room, and I'm assuming that most of you are kind of connected to one institution or the other. So this is where I would like some interaction. So think about this ecosystem of data spaces, of infrastructures now. How could they help your everyday work? So if anybody would be willing to come up and share from an institutional perspective. So if you're in a library, a cultural heritage institution, an internet archive, a research infrastructure, a researcher, how might data space, if you can imagine the ideal data space, how could it help you in the institutional context? So is anybody willing to come and share their specific example, please? Thank you very much. And while our colleague is coming, I would love to have some other volunteers, so maybe think, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. I'm Mario from the University of Campinas in Brazil, and I'm working with a group of researchers with social media content, and one of the biggest challenges is how to archive, how to deal with social media and their digital material that tells so much about today's heritage. So it would be really important to have something to better conceptualize and to better have an infrastructure to deal with social media as part of archives of today and heritage of today. So I'd like to, so that this would be important, and we would like to ask you, how can all of this, how can DARIAH help in conceptualizing and dealing with these difficult questions such as the debate between private and public and the role of proprietary platforms? Thank you very much.
If you could stay there just 1 minute, because I want to come back on this. So this is wonderful. So this is social media born digital archiving. And interestingly, in the survey that we did with national libraries, many of you may know the International Internet Preservation Consortium, or IIPC, who is another sister infrastructure we're working closely. But this is a really practical need. And I noticed you said you were from Brazil. I mean, we've talked about the European data space a lot. Does that, do you feel excluded? How should we think of this in a global context?
Oh, it's hard. Yeah. Somehow I feel not excluded. I wouldn't say I feel excluded, but I feel a foreign. So I feel that I'm coming from the outside. And most of the times I think we need to have our DARIAH, or we need to somehow have DARIAH going to us and integrating everyone in a better way. Like, so I'm working especially with informal archives about the pandemic. Also, these archives that carry very rich material, they are on the internet, but like Instagram pages or Facebook groups. And you have very rich material that really requires some infrastructural and some type of conceptual support, especially when you talk about a global matter, and everything is more global than ever today. So it's been great to have the possibility of learning about this, but I think you might be a little bit correct to imagine that coming from the outside and seeing that, especially in the global south, we lack this type of transnational institution and infrastructure. It's something that it is worth taking a look closely and thinking how to surpass this, not to repeat global inequalities as we did developing knowledge and science in the past.
This is wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that. And I love this. Some of you may know we did DARIAH Beyond Europe, and we were exactly criticised. We reached out to the North America and to Australia, and in our DH, we presented our poster at DH, and exactly what about the Global South? So can we think of data spaces beyond Europe? Anybody else would like to share? Kim, please.
Great, thank you. So my question is related to sort of all the 5 themes, but so I've worked in a few data spaces and I've worked with a few data spaces. And generally, kind of what seems to be missing is both a social and a legal issue, and that is about web accessibility of data spaces. So for instance, Europeana has an accessibility statement and are actively working towards increasing the accessibility of your service, which is fantastic. But other services I work with, when we are in the project stage, it doesn't really seem to be a part of the discussion, which is actively excluding both researchers as well as the general public. So I'm curious, is that the role of the research infrastructure to continue to ask for an expansion of accessibility of the services? And when I mean legal context, I mean the EU Web Accessibility Guidelines that have been in place since 2021, but we have database spaces that are still inaccessible. So I'm curious where that falls into this discussion. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed for sharing. That's a topic very close to our hearts as well. I think this is something, so when we're still conceptualizing the data spaces, this can't be an afterthought. So we really need to include those discussions really from the beginning. I can't believe it. I was really scared that this session nobody would say anything, so I'm really happy that everyone has been so generous, as Stephen said. So we're just going to wrap up. So I haven't forgotten all of you, so please, last thoughts and questions. But as we move forward, so we're thinking about the role of infrastructures such as operas, such as DARIAH, such as Clarin, in these data spaces. So for your own, what is the role of your individual organization? So moving forward, if you can imagine the ideal data space and how your organization, how you as an individual, what might we be? So this is the visioning. So what is your takeaway from this question? If you could think one thing that you would like to do to take this forward, how might it be? And I'm going to go this way this time. So over to Alba.
Thank you. You just said some nice exchanges with a colleague from Brazil, so Southern America, and also Kim said something about accessibility. So this leads me to think, should we invest more about multilingualism? Spanish, Portuguese, in terms of data, can lead Europe to Southern America. It's natural. Should we think to what extent is that English is a barrier in Europe? There are initiatives, again, like regional apps, help us in overcoming all the barriers that we see.
I am put on the hat of the chair of the European Research Community. I'll think what we should do is keep the conversation going at least. And apart from that, I also would like to contribute more to having those really concrete, generous guidelines of how to have data in that data space, how to work with that data. Also things like model cards, data sheets for the machine learning models that are being created. Things like that. All of that needs more documentation and information, and this helps. This helps people raising their skill level, etc. So I think those kind of concrete things that would be what I would love to contribute to mostly. And I was wondering, should an ideal data space, should that be visible? Should that be invisible?
So from the perspective of a national node of operas, I really like the point about multilingualism, and language is one thing. So, translating all those guidelines that we're talking about, using the documentation, but also trying to fit it into the particular national needs that each country has, each region has, when we're talking about hubs, trying to always translate not just in terms of those languages, but also in terms of particular points that should be there, maybe additions, maybe omissions, maybe specific cases that make it just easier to understand and easier to use by local communities.
Okay, so before I will talk about my institute, I would like to give a suggestion for DARIAH, as you asked. Because we have those working groups, we have regional hubs, I would suggest to have data teams, the teams that are working on creation of data sets, especially data sets that are valuable for different communities, and that can be provided in a kind of a product way. I know that Thomas mentioned that services or workflows are more important than products, but I believe that if we treat those assets as real products, that's something that we provide to our users, or even we could say customers, really could really bring the power to this working group and to the quality of the data and how they are served. Now, when it comes to the perspective of my institution and the vision, I would see it like that. I mean, we are infrastructure provider. I like to see this way, that we are part of this infrastructure of the background routines that deliver data that are easy to access, that you can easily, as a user, analyze or process, or you can use tools that are helpful in your daily life. And I would like to see it in a way that it is now with the internet, right? Because maybe you don't know, but also PSNC, of course in Poland, but also in a broader context, JANT is providing internet access to public institutions. Like here we have Eduroam, and this is really built by the infrastructure that is focused on access to the internet. So I'd like us to use those data spaces and the collaborative cloud in a way we are using now the internet, So that.
Wow, data themes, data teams, and my favorite infrastructure, Eduroam. So any final thoughts from the audience?
I have one from Discord.
Excellent. One on Discord, please. Kim, and then a final thought from Panos as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So from Joanna, just a quick comment. And nowadays, with so much initiative and projects, we need one place or general institution which would act as a sort of integration or a place to go to ask questions and get answers that we need, or even better, to find the solutions to the problems. A place where we go to find a solution that occur within the GLAM world or any other research process, and a community of researchers to discuss with. So.
Wow, thank you very much. That's a wonderful thought. And I'd like to welcome Panos for his thoughts.
Try things. You mentioned at least twice ideal data space. What if we had an ideal data space? So this brings to my mind that perhaps the term space is unique. What if we think of data spaces as services? We need to look at them as services in order to be able to answer if they are ideal or less ideal, which brings us back to stakeholders, the users, the communities, the institutions, and I think that in this, from this point of view, DARIAH as an anthropocentric infrastructure, able to, which is an ideal position to bring together and promote the needs of the stakeholders and make sure that data spaces may become better, perhaps ideal.
Thanks very much. So this is really, so data spaces as services. So already what is inside the data space from a service perspective, and that chimes very well with what Thomas said. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that? Not really. So I want at this point to say thank you all to our willing people who would join me in this data space dialogue salon. So thank you very much to our colleagues. And thank you to the generous colleagues who shared from their personal experience. This was wonderful. So thanks very much. Right. Well, it's near to the closing remarks. So you can stand up, shake your legs a second while we just prepare the final slide.